And that's the sign that it's... Do you see the arrow spinning? Good.
Is Jerry okay?
All right. Well, this is the last class for this semester. We'll start again sometime in September. What I'm thinking of doing is starting earlier in September and then taking a week off in the middle of October to do gardening work. And, you know, then we'd have both a Thanksgiving and an other off day, but would have as many talks. All right. We are studying mystical cosmology. And cosmology is how the cosmos works, how things get done. This is our 12th talk on this subject. And we have seen that cosmologically everything is accomplished through cycles. The first cycle that we looked at, we spent a lot of time looking at it. It was the cycle of introversion and extroversion. How we take things in and what we put out and what's involved in that. Now we are studying the cycle of rebirth. And we're going tediously slow, which is the way I prefer to do things these days. And we're looking at, so far, we only have looked at the part of the cycle where we're here, right here, life on Earth. And we've been looking now at how consciousness relative to time is important to how we understand things. We have learned that the way we turn our consciousness affects our relationship to the world. And in that we have noticed that turning our consciousness forward in time is materializing and incarnating, while turning our consciousness backward in time is dematerializing and disincarnating. And we've been looking at it as it happens to us in our daily lives. We have said that the dematerialization, or the what could be called the retreat to the spiritual worlds, the way that happens is when we look back after an event is over, we see that event from consequence to cause. And when we first experienced it, we saw it from cause to consequence. And that gives us a sense of the whole. And the spirit basically sees things in wholes, and it does things in wholes. Like the spirit doesn't so much look at details. It looks at the whole of all things. And that is how things are watched or looked into or absorbed into the spirit. It's taken in whole, not piecemeal. Now, when we look back in life here on earth, we let go of things. We find that all the time with older people, that the older that we get, the more things we let go of. Now, if this looking back, this retrospection is very deep and it's very thorough, in the cosmos it actually even disintegrates the stuff of the world. That's how the world is dissolved, is in all of the worlds are dissolved in a gigantic retrospection. But if a young person, say in their 20s, is looking at their newborn, they're looking back also. But that activity is not as deep, and they're not looking back from consequence to cause, but they're looking back to some extent at their own lives. Now, even though that's mild, the effect of doing that is progressive and it's effective. But at that time of life, you have so much ahead of you and so many goals and things you want to do in life that the effect isn't as strong as in later in life. All right. Aesthetics is a name for the study of beauty. And over many centuries, aestheticians, who are philosophers who study beauty, have come to believe or consider that symmetry is one of the attributes of beauty. Some mystics believe that this is because symmetry suggests and leads one to perceive or apperceive unity, the kind of unity that we find in the universal spirit. In mystical terms, if we proceed from the outer material world inward toward the spirit, when we get beyond the self, to the selfness, or to the truth that is in all principles, that is the first realm of pure spirit. Spirit without differentiation, and not even an idea in it. That's life spirit. And that unity of life spirit is love. Christ love or altruistic love. Now the love that is experienced in that state is so deep that there is no distinction between lover and beloved. In fact, the reality of it is that it is all the beloved. Now when we say these things, we have to be careful because logic and language are inadequate. So there appear to be apparent inconsistencies in all of this. But without going into worldly details, we should still be able to get the drift of all of this. And this is not something new. Like the Platonistic, the Orphic mystical philosophers, they named the three attributes of the spirit not after beings. They did that, but they named them according to the qualities that they had. And we've all heard those qualities before. And those qualities are truth, beauty, and goodness. Truth relating to human spirit, beauty relating to life spirit, and goodness relating to the divine spirit. So we can see that different mystics at different times in history, from their experience, have come to the same conclusion. So in the experiencing of beauty, we are experiencing a kind of a nostalgia or a longing for that divine love and unity, which is sometimes pretty scarce here. So the symmetry that we're looking for is part of that unity, part of that love that holds it all together. Now, how this relates to I sometimes have a hard time breaking into the subject matter. The universal spirit interpenetrates everything. It is in everything, and everything is in it. However, everything that is in the universal spirit is not symmetric. Even though it's of a divine origin, when it becomes manifest, it isn't necessarily symmetric. And you can't make it be something that it isn't. And some belief systems try to do that, and they try to do it with great intolerance. So we don't want to do that. So even though it would be nice to say that there's a symmetry between turning consciousness backward and turning one's consciousness forward, there really is not such a symmetry. There is incarnation and disincarnation, yes, but it's not symmetric. To state it as simply as possible, the past is factual. The future is not factual. There's a temptation in this to say that the past is factual and the future is theoretical. There's something to that, but that's not completely the truth either. So there's also, among some people, when they're confronted with things like that, there's a tendency to say that none of this matters. That time, as we experience time here in this material limitation, is basically illusion. That in the moment of eternity, everything is present, and cyclicity is a manifestation of it. So it's all here. Now, aspirants or proponents of that kind of outlook usually like to quote a line that comes from the book of Revelation in the Bible. The one that is and was and is to come. The one that is all that was and is to come. Now, I don't find any argument with that kind of statement, but I certainly do differ with the interpretation of it. Newness or unprecedented things are not illusion. This existence where we are now may be very limited, and it may have illusory qualities about it compared to the higher spiritual realms, but it is real. And the things that we do here are real, and they have consequence. And they have consequence for the whole itself, for the universe itself. Now, stating this in another way, it's impossible that every being in the universal spirit experiences newness in the struggle of creation. This is not a walkthrough. We really are experiencing something real, something new, and that the universal spirit itself does not experience newness. That's nonsensical to think that everything in the universal spirit is experiencing something new and not the spirit itself. This is a creation. It's an evolutionary creation, and creation means something new. As I see it, once somebody becomes wakingly conscious and realizes even just a hint of their true spiritual being, of themselves as a creative free agent, it is our duty, it is our nature, it is what we do to become more creative. Now, the scheme of the whole evolutionary creation in which we're lucky to be part of, that may have been laid out from the beginning, but the creation itself is not. The participants, the creatures, the gods, and beings like that are becoming gods. We not only realize it, we make it real. Altogether, we create and recreate it so that the creation itself is new even to the Creator. Each of us is valuable as a being that is remaking the entire creation, but that sounds pretty grandiose. but even the little things that we do creatively are new. And they are new for the Creator. So creation doesn't happen just once at the beginning of a manifestation, and then there is no more. Creation is present every step of the way. And the more we participate in the spirit of creation, the more joyous our lives are. This is one of those talks that is a series of sermons, and that's the end of the first sermon. I don't know, in my dotage, I'm becoming a sermonizer. If we apply this way of living, some rather unusual things come out, and we will address some of them along the way. First, there are different attitudes that have to be addressed. Different attitudes about looking forward and looking backward, about the past and the future. As we have seen, the past is fact, and the best attitude toward the past is objectivity. Almost any subjectivity about the past inhibits growth, and it produces or extends problems or misunderstandings. We see this in the news. Sometimes a politician or a celebrity or somebody that is before the public eye will make a statement about his or her life and intent. And then the fact finders come in. And the fact finders are usually the press, which get damned because of it. And they start bringing up previous statements and actions which contradict the statement just made by the person. On rare occasions, it happens that the individual will admit that they did think and act that way, but that they have learned from experience and they can no longer think that way. And sometimes the confession is really sincere, and the conversion that has taken place since the original statements is a really genuine thing. Now, recently, this just happened here in the politics of Wisconsin, and there was a confession, but that confession was not contrite, not in the least. And it was literally a politically correct statement. Had nothing to do with the genuine views of the individual. Now, I can remember when there were occasions when a confession was true, and the life that came out of that was better. But what usually happens is there's a denial. And the first thing in the denial is always linguistics. The way it was said isn't what I meant. Then there are all kinds of accusations between the press being called for twisting the words, which sometimes they do, and political bias and all of those sorts of things come in. Often, the individual involved isn't intentionally lying. It's usually more of a matter of a silent lying to ourselves about ourselves. In our ego consciousness, even our lower ego consciousness, there's a feeling of immortality. And when we are self-conscious, we feel that I am and have always been self-conscious in the attitude that I'm in now. So I couldn't possibly have spoken differently. I don't lie. This is why it's really important to have something that we can look back and see exactly what we did and what our attitudes were. It's kind of shaming, and you want to hide your face in your hands sometimes, but in true self-consciousness, we have to be very objective about the past. Now, all of this is said not to pass judgment on politicians or anyone else, and they were just chosen because they're before our eyes all the time, and this is a case where it all comes out. Probably all of us have done this and still do this. We lie to ourselves. If we didn't lie to ourselves and we were more perfect, our spiritual advancement would be somewhere, and we would be able to do miraculous, creative kinds of things. However, to say something like that doesn't make it right. Generalization is not to condone incorrect behavior. So, seeing ourselves objectively and changing is not an easy thing. This is why the retrospection exercise for spiritual growth or improvement is so difficult. It sometimes takes a lot of years before you're ready to see some things about yourself and to be able to change them. When I lived near Los Angeles at one time, and I had a young African-American friend who we became pretty good chums. He came to where I was living. He said, I came straight from the 12th house. He said, because I got caught with my Neptune man. So, meaning, but we became really very good friends. And we talked about astrology all the time. And one day he came to me when he was all upset. And he said, I just discovered something in my horoscope. He said, I have all of the aspects that are typical African American aspects. The love for flashy clothes and all of that whole thing. He came and said, I have all of that, and it's right in my chart, and I didn't see it. And that was because he wasn't ready to see that. He wasn't ready to see himself as from where he came from and to where he was going. And he had been studying for 2 or 3 years, and at that point, he could look at those things, and it wasn't him anymore. And that's a perfect example. Some things you're not ready for them, and so to overcome some resistances in ourselves takes a lot of time. We'd all like to be able to function in the spiritual worlds in full waking consciousness. But the spiritual worlds are far more subtle than this chemical world. And so we have to cultivate a lot of subtlety to do this. And when we try to develop subtlety and be able to look into ourselves and see what's behind every one of our words or acts, we have psychological resistance. We have built up this false ego that from an unconscious state keeps us from projecting because it's afraid it's going to lose its power. So we protect ourselves, and much of that protection is subjective. Now, this is not to say that we should be admitting to ourselves that we are bad or inherently sinful, because that isn't true. In our true nature, we really are divine beings. However, our total personality, in it, we have unredeemed things that are built in, things that we haven't changed in ourselves for many lives. So until we become subtle enough and courageous enough to face ourselves objectively And until we have been able to take ourselves in hand and act and change things as we see them, we can't progress spiritually. Some say that when you leave the body in full waking consciousness with full awareness of what you're doing, you pass the dweller on the threshold. And the dweller on the threshold is nothing other than a form that is an expression of all of our unredeemed bad attitudes. So every time we confront something in ourselves and transform it into something positive, what we're doing is we are diminishing the horror of ourselves that we have to pass through in order to enter into the kingdom of the gods. So we have to not be subjectively protecting ourselves. So, seeing the dweller means that we have become objectively aware. And that's not some magic, mystical gift that's given to us. It means that our seeing into things, because we have to be able to see through ourselves first, because that is our vehicle for addressing any given world, is seeing ourselves, the clairvoyance is a result of an objective faculty that has been developed by honesty and self-confrontation. It's a latent talent, and that talent can only be developed by subtle, persistent self-application. That's the end of the second sermon. Now it's time for correction. It is a rhetorical tool to intentionally overstate something, to really make a point, to really hammer it home. You can always correct later, which is what we're going to do now. Now, it was overstatement to give the impression that the only objectivity, that objectivity is the only attitude about the past, or that we can have, or that we should have. There are a lot of different valid attitudes about everything. There might even be a place for a little bit of subjectivity. And it isn't even a matter of volition, because some subjectivity is almost certain because of the reality of our consciousness. Objectivity, what is it? Some people claim that objectivity is the sum total of all of the subjective points of view. So unless you can see all the subjective points of view, you can't be objective. This is why some people, like Rudolf Steiner, claim that there is no objectivity until you get to the realm of life spirit and you can see all of the differential, separated points of view. And we can't be objective about things that we are unaware of. For example, in our spatial experience, it's dependent on sense perception. And our sense perception is so limited that we can't see things from all different perspectives. We can only see what's directly in front of us with our eyes, maybe a little bit to the side. We don't see what's behind us. So as our consciousness expands, we can experience more of the whole, and then our objectivity will increase. Nevertheless, it's still to our advantage to do the best that we can to hold consciously objective attitudes toward the past and anything in it without skewing the past by subjectivity, especially sentimental subjectivity, and other kinds of deflecting subjective attitudes. there does seem to be some symmetry with attitudes about the future. Symmetrically, it is better to be subjective rather than objective about the future ahead of us. First, let's explore some of the problems about objectivity and the future. If we are objective about the future and we are successful in our objectivity, we might not even see our error. If somebody says, I'm going to do such and become such, and that individual perseveres, and they apply themselves, and lo and behold, they do become such and such by doing such and such. However, in the meantime, the future has flowed into the present, and the reality may have rendered one's original goals obsolete. You know, who wants to build a perfect gas lamp when there's electricity? You know, that's a simple, silly example, but that's the way it goes. As I have experienced it, the more important parts that have changed with the flow of the future into the present have been things that I never would have conceived. So it's true that some of this perception is due to maturation. As you get older, you see more things from experience, and some of it's due to awakening. But meaningful change in the world is much, much more extensive than myself or other people would ever guess. So resistance to change is a form of objectification about the future. It is trying to perpetuate the past into the present or into the future. So when people say, give me that old-time religion, they're reactionaries. We now call them fundamentalists, but those are people who resist change. They don't believe that things are going to get better. They don't believe that in the creation that there are far more wonderful things promised to us if we do the work to attain them. They think it's all been that way in the past, and the more we stick to that, the better off we'll be. It's a very sad situation. Now, this too requires some correction, because there are some things from the past that are worth conserving and evolving into the future. Obviously, a person would be a fool to not do any planning at all. If we are wise to have a subjective attitude about the future, it seems that we need to know what subjective means in this usage. Subjectivity does not mean passivity. Having passivity toward the future is something like standing in front of a herd of stampeding cattle. You're going to get overwhelmed in a very, very full way. Subjectivity is more of a receptivity. It's again an attitude. It's an active receptivity, and an active receptivity is anticipatory. It has an intuitive element. However, it is more active than that because it draws the future in. And that drawing quality is a very important quality. This is why clairvoyants who read in the ethers say they remember the future. You know how you try to bring back a recollection, you try to draw something in from the past? That's the way they draw things in that are coming into being through the ethers from the future. But it's even more than that. It is a drawing as in the sense of imagination. Now, in all of this, it is important to keep in mind that we're not all alone. We're not the Lone Ranger against the universe or doing all the work. Now, we may anticipate the unfolding cosmic imagination as it precipitates into realization or into materialization. And in that participation, the materialization through imagination or invention is like what we do in art. But that's not on the same order as in the creation, because we actually participate in the creation of history itself or of reality itself. Clairvoyants report that in between lives, when we are not so personally separated, we participate within nature forces, and that we become part of the ongoing nature forces that are behind what's happening in the world. We are even partial creators in it, and sometimes in a very big way. For example, at one time, we were developing our ability to precipitate concrete thoughts. This is when the Spirit was first coming in and it was first beginning to think. And that quality of precipitation, it's what the alchemists called making a precipitate. They associated that with the inner consciousness of precipitating a thought. And our ability to be able to do that changed the earth itself. We caused the fire fog surrounding the earth to precipitate in what is sometimes called the floods or something like that. So we are participating in everything that's taking place. Max Heindel, for example, said that he thought that the archetype for the North American continent, with all of the different hierarchies, including human beings, was all but complete for radical changes. And he was surprised that it hadn't even happened in his time, that the North American continent would suddenly change in a big way. So it's not difficult to believe that someone may see nature, and when they're seeing nature, see a beauty, and in that there is a recognition, not only the recognition of life spirit, which is pure imagination, but a recognition of having participated in that beauty. Think of someone with a specific place at a specific time. Take John Muir in the Sierras. John Muir saw that beauty, and the part of the reason he probably saw that beauty was because he was part of the nature forces that brought that about. So, keeping it in mind that though we are divine beings, and we're not alone, but that we work with imponderable forces with other beings, we're still humans. There's only so much that we can do, and our creations may be relatively small, but we participate in the imaginative way that the future is brought into being. Now, in the development of this kind of line of consciousness, it becomes clear what we are talking about when we're talking about the subjectivity toward the future. It is really a receptive creativity. The future is created. It is live and it's new, unlike the past, which is, relatively dead The future is new. It's never been before, and that's true for the universal spirit. That the things that come into being have never been in being before for the universal spirit as well as for ourselves. And we're lucky enough to perceive it in a very clear, distinct way. Now, this is just another way of coming to that same realization that if there's nothing new for the Creator, there's nothing new for the creative participants. It's another way of seeing that it's impossible for every being in the cosmos to experience newness, but not the Creator. It's not even possible. No. This will probably be done under an hour this time. The universal spirit may be all that is and was and is to come, but it is not what is not. The universal spirit may be omniscient and all-knowing, but it does not know the unknown. In potential, are things unknown that could be, but they will not be known until they become manifest. They will not become. And that becoming is a creative process. And this means that the engagement of the unknown is as much of an adventure for the universal spirit as it is for us. New is new. Now, the romantic scale of things may be much grander, and the quality of newness may be much more keen, but it still is the quality of newness. This means that there is a feeling of wonder, even for the universal spirit. There's a continuous wonderment at what's happening with the creation. This is why Meister Eckhart was a beautiful, beautiful mystic, 14th century mystic, proclaimed God is enjoying himself. He used the male, but that was, language even had it that way. So the joy and the wonder and the adventure are probably purer in the universal spirit than in us, because there's no insecurity. There is no resistance. Now, the Bible has some interesting things to say about newness, and some of them seem contradictory to what we have just been saying. And I won't contradict those statements, but they may mean something much different than we normally think. Let's take one statement from the Old Testament. There is nothing new under the sun. And let's take one statement from the New Testament, from the being that represents Christ in the revelation of St. John. Behold, I make all things new. Now, the latter statement, behold, I make all things new, is more experientially familiar to us. When we have a life spirit intuition, there is that wonderful feeling of newness. It's a sort of a minor ecstatic experience. When we know the truth, not even why it is the truth, and we just know the truth itself, that discovery is a little feeling of ecstasy. The knowledge involved in a discovery, that becomes old hat. But the intuitive feeling does not. If you come to it with the right perspective, with the right receptive attitude, you can experience it again and again. Little children who are pure and don't have those kinds of resistances, or at least they haven't reawakened them, they can go back to something again and again and again, and that same wonder is there for them each time. This is what it means to be eternally alive in the Spirit. It's always there. In our worldliness and in our waywardness, we're not always there. But when we return, we rejoice because it's rediscovery. The pure truth is, and it always is. And everything issues from it in a manner that we see it around us. Almost like everything we see around us comes out of sunlight. And out of pure truth, everything else in the creation has become manifest. That's how the creative imagination works. From this, we get that sense from the Old Testament quote that it all came from that imaginative source. Just as the New Testament quote, we recognize in ourselves the intuitive discovery going on and on. However, if we take this feeling of discovery, of newness in the human spirit as the essential newness, the ultimate newness, it makes the creation a hoax. As wonderful as that feeling is, it makes the creation a hoax. It makes it like one of those movies where it isn't genuine emotion, but the movie maker is skilled enough to bring you to a certain kind of feeling of emotion so that you'll buy a ticket and come back for the next one. The same thing can happen with regard to the newness if it's only experienced in the spirit and it's not a genuine newness for the spirit itself. What we want is reality. And there is a new reality. And it isn't just a replaying in the spirit. Now, if we find this newness in creation and in its stuff, we have a much different view of newness than that orthodoxy teaches. Now, that's not to say that orthodoxy is wrong or false or that it doesn't serve any value. It's merely to say that there is more to newness than orthodoxy knows of. And one of the peculiarities of this view is that it puts newness at the frontier of the evolutionary creation. The mysteries see that one of the aims of the evolutionary creation is the spiritualization of matter. In this regard, the Western mysteries speak of spiritual growth, that the spirit grows in itself, to itself, out of the potential of the absolute. Matter, in this kind of view, is a buffer between the known and the unknown. I like to refer to it, matter is a congealed ignorance within potentiality. Matter is a manifest imagination to address the becoming future from what potentially could be the becoming future. As matter becomes spiritualized, as the unknown becomes known, the future out of potential becomes now. As the life spirit in the universal spirit, the life spirit, the pure imagination, discovers the new in its own manifestation, there is a sense of ecstasy. That is what it is for the universal spirit to take joy in its own creation. So that it can't have all been there for it ahead of time, because if it were all there for it ahead of time, it would be ho-hum, I know that already, or I've lived that already. However, it isn't that. It's genuine, and it's a rejoicing in the newborn present. And it is real, and it, one becomes greater in oneself. Automatically is humbling, because there's something more than even the universal spirit knows of itself. Now, some people might raise the objection that the future of the creation was laid out long ago, before the states of matter were manifest. The divine scheme of things, the divine dream, before there were even worlds for it to manifest in. I have no exception with that. I wouldn't disagree with that at all. A creative moment is a creative moment, no matter what its duration or what its magnitude. If you want to look at the whole manifestation as a creative moment, that's fine. There may be in that imagination many different fronts or many different frontiers or buffers, or whatever you want to call it, but somewhere, large or small or all along the way, there has to be a moment of creative realization. And that moment of creative realization is newness. If we put it in terms of modern slang, somewhere along the way, the rubber has to hit the pavement in order for there to be traction and not just wheel spinning. And that's what we're talking about in a divine sense. All right, that's what I think is involved with looking forward and materialization and the newness that comes with it. And in September, we will go forward and probably will be more familiar with what looking at things that are more familiar to most people than this. Any questions?
Is nostalgia and sentimentality healthy? Is that just us trying to experience the newness over again, or I can't decide?
It all depends. If we have a longing for the spirit that we need to feel whole, that kind of nostalgia or homesickness for our divine being is healthy. But if we try to indulge ourselves into all kinds of maudlin sentimentality and not even see the past the way it was when it was there, that I think is unhealthy. Well, no more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard.